Did you know that one of the most recognizable symbols in modern occultism was designed to express, in a single continuous line, the union of will, cosmic order, ritual power, and inner transformation? At first glance, the Unicursal Hexagram looks like a variation of the six-pointed star. But the deeper you go, the more you realize it is not just a symbol to be admired. It is a symbol to be worked with, contemplated, and in a very real sense, lived. And that is precisely why it has fascinated magicians, initiates, esoteric philosophers, and seekers of hidden knowledge for more than a century. Because behind this single figure lies an entire worldview about the structure of reality, the reconciliation of opposites, and the path of consciousness through matter. To understand the Unicursal Hexagram correctly, we have to begin with an important distinction that many people miss. The ordinary hexagram, the six-pointed star most people know, is usually formed by two interlaced triangles. One points upward and one points downward. In esoteric language, that has often represented the union of fire and water, spirit and matter, heaven and earth, the descending and ascending currents of existence. The Unicursal Hexagram is different. It preserves the six-pointed structure, but instead of being built from two separate triangles, it can be traced in one unbroken movement. That difference may seem minor, but symbolically it changes everything. It suggests not merely opposition held in balance, but a dynamic continuity moving through all opposites as one stream. That is where the symbol becomes so powerful. In sacred geometry, form is never just decoration. Form is meaning, number is meaning, proportion is meaning. The hexagram belongs to a family of symbols connected to the mystery of six. 6 directions of space, 6 points around a center, six-fold symmetry, the ordered expansion of life from a hidden source. Long before the unicursal form emerged in the modern esoteric world, human beings were already reading cosmic significance into geometry. Ancient cultures may not have used this exact symbol in the form associated with modern occultism, but they repeatedly returned to star patterns, solar wheels, interwoven designs, sacred knots, and six-fold arrangements to express harmony, fertility, celestial order, and the living rhythm of nature. This is where the older pagan world becomes important. In many pre-Christian traditions, sacred symbols were not separated from the cosmos. They were not viewed as abstract signs floating above life. They were embedded in seasons, rites, temples, sky lore, harvest cycles, and the relationship between the visible and the invisible. Solar symbolism, cyclical symbolism, and the meeting of above and below appear again and again in Indo-European, Mediterranean, Near Eastern, and mystery traditions. So when modern occultists later embrace a symbol like the Unicursal Hexagram, they are not inventing the sacred out of nothing. They are inheriting a much older intuition that the universe speaks in pattern and that geometry can reveal invisible law. In my opinion, this is one of the most beautiful aspects of esotericism. It reminds us that symbols are not merely things to believe in. They are ways of seeing. And once you begin seeing reality through pattern, correspondence, and proportion, you start noticing that the same truths appear across traditions that never use the exact same language. That is why the hexagram, in its broader symbolic sense, resonates so deeply with what many call the perennial philosophy, the idea that beneath the diversity of religions, myths, and initiatic systems, there is a core metaphysical truth about unity expressing itself through polarity. This current becomes much clearer when we move into the Hermetic and magical traditions of late antiquity and the Renaissance. Hermetic philosophy, alchemy, and later ceremonial magic all develop a vision of the human being as a microcosm of the macrocosm. As above, so below is not just a poetic phrase. It is a key to symbolic reasoning. If the cosmos is ordered, then the soul can be ordered. If the heavens express intelligible law, ritual can become a way of aligning the human instrument with those laws. Thinkers like Marsilio Ficino, Cornelius Agrippa, and later Eliphas Levi helped shape a magical worldview in which symbols, names, numbers, and geometries were treated as active bridges between planes of reality. In that environment, the hexagram becomes more than a sign of duality. It becomes a map of relation, upper and lower, inner and outer, center and circumference, aspiration and embodiment. By the 19th century, this symbolic universe becomes even more systematized in Western esoteric orders. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, in particular, played a major role in turning symbols into operational tools for ritual, meditation, and initiatic training. In ceremonial magic, the pentagram is often associated with the human sphere and elemental work, while the hexagram is linked to planetary and macrocosmic forces. This distinction matters because it shows that the hexagram was not merely an ornament in magical tradition. It was part of a real symbolic grammar used to organize consciousness, ritual action, and cosmological understanding. Later authors like Israel Regardie preserved much of this initiatic language, allowing future generations to study how symbols were actually used rather than only admired from a distance. And then we arrive at the point where the story becomes unmistakably modern: Aleister Crowley and Thelema. This is where the Unicursal Hexagram takes on its most distinctive and influential esoteric identity. Crowley did not invent the six-pointed star, of course, but he helped elevate the Unicursal Hexagram into one of the defining emblems of Thelemic symbolism. In many Thelemic contexts, the symbol appears with a 5-petaled rose at the center, and that detail is not accidental. The 6-fold star and the 5-fold rose create a profound union of principles. 6 points outward to cosmic structure, macrocosm, celestial order. 5 points toward the human being, the quintessence, the awakened individual, the embodied will. Together, they suggest the marriage of the human and the cosmic, the personal and the universal, the finite and the infinite. This is one reason the symbol became so important in Thelema. Thelema is built around the discovery and execution of the true will, not in the shallow sense of doing whatever one wants, but in the much deeper sense of aligning one's entire existence with one's essential law of being. Crowley's famous definition of magic as the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will belongs here. The Unicursal Hexagram becomes a fitting emblem because it suggests movement without fragmentation, unity without rigidity, and direction without inner division. It shows that the path is not made of disconnected pieces. It is one movement, one line, one current flowing through apparent contradiction, and that is where the symbol begins to move beyond the page and into practice. Experienced practitioners do not work with symbols like this merely as decorative motifs. They use them as engines of concentration, as visual condensations of doctrine, as meditative frameworks, and as ritual anchors. A magician may contemplate the Unicursal Hexagram as a discipline of integration, training the mind to perceive order where it once perceived only conflict. Another may place it on an altar, a layman, or a ritual implement as a reminder that spiritual ascent and worldly embodiment are not enemies, but phases of one current. In contemplative practice, a symbol like this can become a kind of silent teacher, not because it speaks in words, but because it trains attention to hold complexity without collapsing into confusion. When I first understood that the line could be traced continuously, I felt that the symbol changed completely. It stopped looking like a mystical logo and started looking like a metaphysical statement. For me, that is the real threshold. The Unicursal Hexagram says that the path to wholeness is not achieved by erasing opposites, but by passing consciously through them. Spirit and matter, discipline and freedom, transcendence and immanence, light and shadow. The initiate does not become whole by denying one side of reality. The initiate becomes whole by discovering the center through which all sides are reconciled. Now, this is also where many people want to connect the symbol to Freemasonry, especially through the square and compasses. Here, we need to be precise. The Unicursal Hexagram is not a central official symbol of mainstream regular Freemasonry in the same way the square and compasses are. But on the level of symbolic comparison, the relationship is deeply suggestive. The square and compasses represent order, proportion, right measure, spiritual aspiration, and the construction of the inner temple. The square evokes form, ethics, grounding, and rectification. The compasses evoke limit, expansion, spiritual vision, and the tracing of a higher order over the roughness of raw existence. If we compare these principles to the Unicursal Hexagram, we begin to see a shared initiatic logic. Both speak of bringing chaos into pattern. Both speak of aligning the human being with a greater geometry. Both imply that inner work is not random, self-expression, but measured transformation. This is why esoteric interpreters, such as Manly P. Hall, and in different ways Albert Pike within broader symbolic discourse, become relevant to the conversation. Even when they are not speaking specifically about the Unicursal Hexagram, they help illuminate the initiatic mindset in which geometry becomes moral, spiritual, and cosmological at once. In this mindset, to work with form is to work on the soul. To contemplate proportion is to contemplate law. To understand the center is to understand the self, and that center is everything. In sacred geometry, the center is never just a point. It is the hidden source from which order radiates. The hexagram, whether traditional or unicursal, only becomes fully intelligible when we remember that its tensions resolve inwardly. The center is the place of equilibrium, but not passive equilibrium. It is a living equilibrium, a generative stillness, a silence that organizes movement. This is why the Bida symbol can be read metaphysically as a diagram of manifestation itself. The one becomes many, but the many never truly leave the one. The path outward and the path inward remain connected. That insight is also what links the Unicursal Hexagram to the perennial philosophy in a way that feels surprisingly universal. Across Hermeticism, Kabbalah, mystical Christianity, Neoplatonism, certain streams of pagan thought, esoteric masonry, and Thelemic magic, we find recurring versions of the same. Intuition, reality is structured. Consciousness can participate in that structure, and initiation is the process of learning how to live in conscious accord with it. The names change, the symbols change, and the doctrinal language changes, but the deeper current remains recognizable. Of course, in the modern world, symbols are often flattened. Some people see the Unicursal Hexagram as nothing more than occult aesthetics. Others fear it without understanding it. Others use it casually, stripped of its philosophical and initiatic depth. But a true symbol always resists reduction. It survives because it continues to reveal more than one level at once. It can function ritually, philosophically, psychologically, and artistically without exhausting itself. That is the mark of a real esoteric symbol. It does not merely point to a secret, it reorganizes perception. And now think back to the question hidden at the beginning of this journey. How can one simple figure contain so much? The answer is that it doesn't contain it the way a box contains objects. It contains it the way a seed contains a tree. The Unicursal Hexagram is a compression of principles, continuity, polarity, integration, will, center, correspondence, and sacred order. That is why initiates return to it, not because it is obscure, but because it is fertile. So I want to ask you something. Before this video, did you see the Unicursal Hexagram as just a Thelemic symbol? Or did you already sense that it carried a much older geometry of consciousness behind it? Let me know in the comments, because the answer says a lot about how we approach esoteric knowledge itself. And I am also curious which connection struck you most deeply: the sacred geometry, the ceremonial magic, the Thelemic interpretation, or the symbolic parallel with the square and compasses. I would genuinely like to know, because each of those doorways reveals a different face of the same mystery. In the end, maybe that is why symbols like this endure. Not because they hide arbitrary secrets from the world, but because they quietly reveal a pattern the soul already recognizes. A single line, a sixfold form, and a hidden center. And the reminder that what appears divided on the surface may, at a deeper level, still belong to one movement.